At 7:23 local time, a Ukrainian MiG-29 was screaming north at nearly 490 miles per hour, cutting through the morning air like it was on rails. But the real danger wasn't what people could see, it was what they couldn't. Just behind the MiG, so low it blended into the terrain, flew a swarm of 9 newly developed Ukrainian jet-powered drones, known as Rutas. They moved in perfect formation at treetop level, their composite bodies soaking up radar energy like shadows swallowing light. From a distance, they didn't look like aircraft, they looked like nothing. And that was the point, because the MiG wasn't trying to sneak in, it wasn't trying to hide, it was doing the opposite, staying high enough to be noticed, deliberately advertising itself to Russian sensors like a flare in the dark. This was a trap. The MiG would pull every radar and interceptor skyward, while the real strike package ghosted through underneath, headed for a target that could choke Russian operations overnight, a dam deep inside Russian territory. If you want more stories like this, subscribe in one click, because the next move turns the sky into a battlefield. Inside the cockpit, the pilot already knew the exact second the game began. His radar warning receiver erupted into full alarm, an unmistakable screech that meant only one thing: he had been painted. An S-400 battery near Belgorod had locked onto him the moment he climbed above 15,000 feet, pouring tracking energy into his aircraft with enough precision to follow something the size of a bird from extreme range. Most pilots would do the same thing instinctively: break away, dive low, disappear, but this pilot didn't. He held course, because on this mission, being detected wasn't a mistake, it was a requirement. His briefing had been brutally clear: draw every Russian radar upward, force them to focus on the MiG, force them to chase the obvious threat. And while they did that, 9 Rutas drones would slide beneath the radar horizon, hugging the terrain, following pre-programmed routes Ukraine had built from satellite imagery, because Russia had been jamming navigation signals across the border for months. No GPS, no live guidance, just speed, terrain, and timing. Ahead, about 8 miles inside Russian territory, stood the target, the Belgorod Reservoir Dam, a concrete structure controlling the water lifeline of a river system that had become a linchpin for Russian logistics and forward positions. And as the MiG climbed higher, the pilot watched the geometry of his own danger take shape on the displays. The S-400's engagement radar was sweeping the sky every few seconds, and any moment now, somewhere in the distance, a missile could start spinning up in its launch tube. The Belgorod Reservoir Dam wasn't just concrete and water, it was leverage, because downriver, Russian units were advancing, and the lifeline feeding that machine wasn't some endless supply dump in the rear. It was a fragile web of roads, bridges, and supply routes running along the river's floodplain. Ammo, fuel, replacement vehicles, generators, radios, all of it moved through corridors that only worked under one condition: the water level stayed predictable, and that's what the dam controlled. If the dam failed, the river wouldn't just rise, it would rewrite the map. Newly built supply roads would become canals, low bridges would vanish, defensive positions, dugouts, berms, trenches would fill like bathtubs in seconds, and units that had pushed forward during the drought season could wake up cut off from everything behind them. That's why Ukraine wasn't aiming at a base. They were aiming at the infrastructure that made a base useful. But up in the sky, none of that mattered if the MiG didn't survive long enough to keep the trap alive, because the pilot could already see what the S-400 was doing. The engagement radar was cycling, search, track, like a heartbeat, and with every sweep it painted the MiG with enough energy to track a figurative sparrow from extreme range. Any second now, a 48 N6 missile could start rising out of a launch tube, built specifically to kill aircraft under these exact conditions. The pilot knew that, and he stayed on course anyway. To buy time, and to keep Russian radar locked onto him instead of the ground, the pilot flipped on his electronic warfare suite. It wasn't standard. It had been retrofitted, adapted, built to fight in a sky where survival depends on what you can hide inside the electromagnetic noise. The cockpit filled with an ugly chorus, warbling interference, competing tones, his aircraft systems fighting Russian radar for dominance over the spectrum. And for a moment, it worked. The S-400's track faltered, the lock broke, the threat display breathed, but the relief lasted only a second, because the moment the pilot jammed the enemy, he created a new problem that could get him killed even faster. The jamming didn't just blind Russia, it also blinded him. His own radar warning receiver, his early warning lifeline, went unreliable. The aircraft was still flying, still moving, still baiting, But now the pilot was effectively flying deaf, and that meant he couldn't detect the next danger closing in from the east. A Russian Su-35 interceptor that had scrambled minutes earlier and was already racing toward him. The MiG didn't see it. He couldn't. But the Su-35 was coming fast, closing to within 40 kilometers and shrinking the distance with every second. Then the MiG's jamming cycle ended, and the moment it did, the cockpit screamed again. The radar warning receiver snapped back to life and instantly flagged two threats. The S-400 had reacquired him, and a second signature, sharp, aggressive, moving fast. The Su-35. Now it wasn't just a ground-based air defense system trying to kill him. It was a fighter designed for air dominance, equipped with long-range missiles that didn't need mercy or luck. This was the moment the mission became real. Showtime. The pilot pulled back on the stick, trading speed for altitude, dragging the fight higher. The MiG clawed upward past 20,000 feet, engines howling at near-max thrust, and the Su-35 matched him. Its radar hunted for a firm solution. Its nose stayed pointed. Its pilot had the advantage in almost every category that matters. Up here, physics itself turns against you. Thrust drops. Fuel becomes precious. Every maneuver costs more than it should, and the MiG pilot could see the geometry tightening. The Su-35 was closing, the S-400 was cycling below, and the safe exits were disappearing one by one. But here's the critical detail. The Russian pilot had taken the bait, because while he chased the MiG into the sky, he stopped watching the ground, and that's where the real strike package was moving, quietly, invisibly, toward the dam. While the MiG performed its aerial theater, the 9 Rutas jet drones broke formation and split into 3 elements. Not randomly, surgically. 3 banked toward the spillway gates, 3 aimed for the eastern embankment, and the final 3, carrying specialized warheads, targeted the dam's soft spot, the central mass. They stayed under 50 meters altitude, hugging the terrain so tightly that radar returns struggled to separate them from the ground itself. No GPS, no live guidance. Russia had been jamming navigation signals across the entire border region for months, so Ukraine built the solution beforehand. Pre-programmed terrain maps, assembled from satellite imagery, feeding the drones a route they could follow like rails. These weren't just drones flying low, they were drones flying as if the ground itself was guiding them, and as they closed in, now just kilometers from a target sitting 8 miles inside Russian territory, their warheads weren't designed for fireworks. They were designed for one terrifying purpose: concrete penetration. Each carried a 40-kilogram shaped charge, built to focus explosive energy into a superplastic jet of copper, an engineered spear meant to punch inward, not outward, not a dramatic blast, a precision collapse. But then, the swarm's sensors detected the first obstacle waiting near the dam: a Russian Panzer S-1 battery positioned roughly 3 kilometers south of the target, and its radar was active, sweeping, searching, trying to find something, anything worth shooting at. The Panzer S-1 sat about 3 kilometers south of the dam like a guard dog on a short chain, radar sweeping in search mode, waiting for aircraft, cruise missiles, anything flying normally. But the Rutas weren't flying normally. They were ground huggers, jet drones skimming so low that their returns blended into the terrain like static. To the Panzer's radar, the world was a messy smear of hills, trees, and clutter, and somewhere inside that smear were 9 fast-moving threats. The battery finally caught something. Not a perfect lock, more like a suspicious flicker, a hint, a maybe. And that was all it needed. The commander couldn't resist. A single 57 E-6 missile jumped from the launcher and snapped forward, accelerating hard toward what the radar insisted was a valid target. Seconds later, the missile detonated in a bright, useless flash, lighting up empty air south of the dam. It hit nothing, and in that failure was the confirmation Ukraine needed. The drones were too low, too masked, too blended into the terrain for the Panzer to reliably track in time. The swarm didn't slow down, it didn't climb, it kept skimming forward, now 5 kilometers to target, as the lead drone's guidance computers began crunching final approach calculations. And above that growing chaos, the MiG pilot reached the moment where every option looked like death, so he chose the one option that bought time. Up high, the Su-35 was closing, and the MiG pilot could feel the noose tightening. He couldn't outrun the Su forever. He couldn't outclimb it without bleeding fuel. And if he dove too low, he'd drop into the S-400's sweet spot, where a 48 N-6 missile could reach him in seconds. The math was brutal, so instead of trying to win, he decided to force a reaction. He selected an R-27, an older missile, semi-active radar homing, the kind that requires the launch aircraft to maintain lock throughout its flight. Inferior to the Su's R-77 in almost every way, except one. The Su-35 still had to respect it. The MiG released. The missile dropped off the pylon, ignited, and streaked forward, an unavoidable question mark racing toward the Russian fighter. The Su-35's warning system erupted, missile inbound. The Russian pilot broke hard right, pulling heavy G's, dumping chaff and flares into the air behind him like glitter in a storm. The MiG pilot fought to keep his nose pointed, trying to hold radar guidance through a full brake turn, an exhausting, ugly struggle. The R-27's seeker lost the thread. The missile sailed past, motor burning out into empty sky. A miss, but not a waste, because the evasion maneuver cost the Su something Ukraine wanted more than a kill: time. And the MiG pilot used that time immediately. The MiG rolled inverted, then the pilot pulled hard into a split-S dive, trading altitude for speed in a single violent move. The aircraft dropped like a stone toward the deck, the airspeed needle climbing as he plummeted toward the S-400's coverage zone. The Su-35 reacquired him quickly, but now everything had changed. The MiG was below, accelerating away, and the S-400 battery, Russia's most expensive air defense system, was now sitting directly in the geometry between the Su-35 and its prey. That created a nightmare scenario. If the Su launched an R-77 at the wrong moment and the MiG maneuvered across the line, a missile could end up crossing into the S-400's engagement envelope. A friendly fire incident wasn't just possible, it was a real risk, and the S-400 operators faced their own impossible decision too. The MiG was dropping through 12,000 feet, entering their optimal engagement zone. They could fire and likely kill the jet, but firing could also put their own fighter at risk if the engagement geometry shifted. So both sides hesitated. Not long, not minutes. 3 seconds. 3 seconds of analysis paralysis. And that was all the Rutas drones needed. Because right then, right on time, the first wave reached the dam. The first 3 Rutas screamed into the spillway gates, still too low for defenses to reliably lock on. Then detonation. Not a huge fireball, a sharp, controlled rippling sequence. Each shaped charge punched a clean, brutal hole around 30 centimeters straight through hardened steel like it was paper. Hydraulic fluid sprayed, mechanisms failed, gate systems jammed and seized, and with that, Russia lost the ability to control what was about to happen. No careful release, no managed flooding, no "we'll handle it." The dam's control was gone. Almost simultaneously, the second trio struck the eastern embankment. Again, the explosions weren't dramatic, because these warheads weren't designed for spectacle. They were designed for penetration. The shaped charges forced their energy forward, creating hypersonic jets of copper that carved into concrete from the inside, cutting channels, chewing structural integrity, creating weaknesses that didn't look catastrophic yet. From the outside, it still looked almost normal. From the inside, the dam was starting to die. Then came the final 3. These carried the specialized warheads aimed at the dam's central mass, the soft spot where internal failure would spread fast. They hit in sequence within a tight window, almost like a drumbeat. Impact, penetration, internal detonation, impact, penetration, internal detonation, impact, penetration, internal detonation. The warheads punched through the outer concrete layer and detonated inside the structure itself, creating a network of internal fractures that were barely visible from outside, but catastrophic to the dam's integrity. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. A pause, a silence. And then the reservoir began to move. At first, it was subtle, water forcing itself through microscopic weaknesses. Then those weaknesses widened, drop by drop, pressure by pressure. The fractures spread like cracking ice. And behind the dam was a volume that didn't care about politics, or war, or tactics. 76 million cubic meters of water. The pressure became relentless. Millions of kilos pushing against weakened concrete. Chunks of the dam face began to shear off, tumbling into the spillway. The MiG pilot saw the flashes reflected in low clouds to the north. Confirmation in the sky that the strike had landed. The mission was complete. Now he just had to survive long enough to get home. And for a brief moment, the defenders weren't thinking about him because the explosions caused noise, confusion, feedback. Then the spectacle hit them like a punch. The dam was collapsing. As the breach widened, the river rose fast, and the landscape, Russia's carefully built logistics web, turned into a trap. Roads that supply convoys had used for months disappeared under brown flood water. Low crossings vanished vanished. Temporary routes built during drought season became useless in hours. Defensive positions, trenches, berms, dugouts filled with freezing runoff. Control the water level, and you control the battlefield. In areas downriver, Russian soldiers woke to chaos, dugouts flooding, generators drowning, vehicles half submerged, ammo and communications gear soaked and ruined. Soon, videos began surfacing, equipment sitting underwater like abandoned scrap. The logistics impact was immediate and brutal. Units that had advanced across the river during the low water months found themselves cut off from resupply. Fuel became precious, ammo became rationed, mobility became a question mark. A bridge can be repaired, a road can be rerouted, a crater can be filled, but a breached dam, you can't repair it while the water is still forcing its way through the break. The flow becomes the enemy, and for mechanized forces, tanks, IFVs, trucks, the problem isn't just food and water, it's fuel, it's parts, it's ammunition, it's the constant heavy logistics chain that keeps an offensive alive. Infantry can survive on drop supplies. A mechanized push cannot, so if resupply collapses, momentum collapses, and rebuilding logistics under winter conditions, while the river is rising, is slow, expensive, and dangerous, which was the entire point. This operation wasn't about winning an airfight, it was about using one MiG-29 as a lure, pulling the sky's attention upward, while 9 jet drones cut the legs out from under Russian logistics below, a trap in 2 layers, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful strike isn't the one that destroys a vehicle, it's the one that destroys the routes that vehicle needs to exist. Stay prepared, stay informed, and subscribe for more.